And as tensions deepen over the war in Gaza, President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu finally talking after a month-long silence. The White House, while reassuring support for Israel, highlighting sticking points that still need to be hashed out. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. So what did Biden say to Netanyahu in their call today?
Good evening to you, Steve. The White House says that President Biden told Netanyahu that while he supports Israel in going after Hamas, Israel needs a more sustainable strategy rather than smashing into Rafah. Here's how the National Security Advisor characterized Biden's message. Watch.
That's what the president said today was, I am for the defeat of Hamas. I believe that they are an evil terrorist group. At the same time, I believe that to get to that, you need a strategy that works. And that strategy should not involve a major military operation that puts thousands and thousands of lives, civilian, innocent lives at risk in Rafah. There is a better way.
While the White House knows that Netanyahu has his own view on the Rafah operation, he has agreed to send a team to Washington for more talks before moving forward with an operation in Rafah, which is where more than a million Palestinian civilians have taken shelter. And the call between Biden and Netanyahu comes just days after President Biden praised Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a speech in which Chuck Schumer basically suggested that Israel should hold new elections to get a new leader. The Israeli Prime Minister, meanwhile, firing back at Schumer's comments just this past Sunday. Watch.
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic.
The White House declined to confirm whether Schumer's comments came up during Biden's call with Netanyahu, but the White House admitted that Netanyahu has raised concerns over, quote, a variety of things that have come out in the American press. Steve.
Yes, Iris, I'm sure we'll be hearing more from both countries when the teams meet here in D.C. this week or early next week, as the White House is saying. So speaking of the press, former President Trump today harshly criticizing some of those media outlets. Tell us more about what he's saying.
Right, so former President Trump on Monday slammed what he called fake news media and their Democrat partners, claiming that they were intentionally taking his words out of context when they said that he was threatening a bloodbath if he doesn't get reelected. And here's a fuller clip of what Trump was saying this past Saturday at a rally in Ohio. Watch.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars if I get elected. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
And while Trump says he was being very clear in saying that he was only referring to the auto industry, and President Biden has accused Trump of endorsing political violence and writing on X that, quote, this guy wants another January 6th. Steve.
NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao reporting live from the White House. Thank you, Iris. The Supreme Court hearing oral arguments today in a high-profile case about free speech and allegations of government censorship on social media. The justices will decide whether the Biden administration illegally pressured social media companies to censor content. Here's part of that opening argument from the government side.
The government may not use coercive threats to suppress speech, but it is entitled to speak for itself by informing, persuading, or criticizing private speakers. Like Bantam Books, this case should be about that fundamental distinction between persuasion and coercion. But unlike Bantam and the case that you'll hear next, this is not a typical suit where a speaker challenges government actions affecting its own speech. Instead, 2 states and 5 individuals are trying to use the Article 3 courts to audit all of the executive branch's communications with and about social media platforms.
The case Murthy versus Missouri alleges that the Biden administration ran a censorship by proxy campaign, saying government officials pressured social media companies to take down posts or suspend accounts over certain content. Specifically, these posts related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the lab leak theory in Wuhan, and the safety and efficacy of COVID vaccines, the 2020 election, as well as Hunter Biden's laptop. 2 lower courts finding that the Biden administration ran a quote-unquote coordinated campaign to suppress disfavored views on social media. The judges granted a temporary injunction blocking the government from continuing to do so. The Biden administration is appealing this case to the Supreme Court, arguing that the government's speech crosses the line into coercion only if there's a threat of adverse government action, and that in this case there were no threats. The plaintiffs argue that there was coercion and that the government's actions violate the First Amendment. Their supporters say the case is pivotal for the fate of free speech on social media. And during the Supreme Court hearing, dozens of rallygoers outside of the building describing the censorship they say they experience from social media companies. NTD's Jack Bradley has the story.
The event, dubbed the Rally to Reclaim Free Speech, was hosted by Children's Health Defense. Dozens of attendees braved the cold outside, while inside, attorneys argued in the Murthy versus Missouri Supreme Court case. Many speakers said they were shocked when information they believed was accurate was censored and labeled as misinformation, as it differed from the mainstream opinion, those related to vaccines for COVID-19, natural immunity, election integrity, and other controversial topics. Behind me at the Supreme Court building, there were oral arguments heard today on a case on whether the Biden administration violated First Amendment rights when they pressured social media companies to censor posts. Now, there was a rally held at the same time right outside the Supreme Court building here, where we heard firsthand experiences on people who experienced this censorship. Take a look.
This is probably the most important Supreme Court case that we'll ever experience in our lifetime. We were shut down. They took our URL back, which means our site was gone. Don't even have to hack it anymore, because we've made the mistake of building our companies and our future in the backyard of these tech companies.
The video was going viral, and it was just deleted off of our social media page, just completely deleted. And then we tried to upload it again, deleted, upload it again, deleted. But even in 2019, we saw it happening where moms and dads were just telling their story about vaccine injury, and that was being censored.
It is defending one of our most basic freedoms, which is the right to free speech. If we don't have speech, then how do we communicate? How do we disseminate information? How do we share information? How do we know what's going on?
For them to censor someone on their site, they're a private company. That's their freedom of speech. But when our government steps in and makes any threat, actually pushes on them at all, clearly the only reason they're pushing is because they're not doing what the government wants, which is censoring speech that is not making the government look good.
Many of the attendees here told me that the fight to defend free speech does not end with this case, and that we can continue to see more activism ahead. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.